Okay, guys, today our guest, Ian Miers, very pertinent timing with this one of the founding computer scientists behind Zcash, somebody who's quite well regarded in the computer science, cryptography domain. It's quite an honor to have him on. Ian, let's just start. What are you up to today? Like, what is your kind of full-time job? And then, you can just give us a little bit of background to the extent that you want to.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C. So I actually live in D.C. I'm taking grad students if anyone's qualified and interested. And I generally work on what do you do with zero-knowledge proofs for applied cryptography. So this starts with Zcash and goes into Zexi, which is Zcash versus Ethereum had a baby. And then now I'm broadly looking at how do you do notions of identity and reputation, both for payments, anti-money laundering, and broadly on the internet. And that's not just reputation and identity, it's accountability, it's ways to express yourself safely, but also show you have some qualifications without completely doxing yourself. And this, I think, is sort of the next, or maybe the next wave of stuff we hopefully will start seeing being commercialized and industrialized. So that's really what I'm working on now. And then still advising Aleo on how to do things, which is one of the Zexi spinouts, and Zcash on how to do scaling with Sean Bo's project Hackathon.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back a little bit to the inception, what you were doing at the time, and just give us a little bit of an overview of your original, introduction with both Zcash and then just working on, ZK tech in general. However you want to kind of jump into it, but maybe, go back a bit and explain where you come from.
So it's 2011, believe it or not. I have quit my job at Microsoft as a software engineer and gone back to Johns Hopkins to work with who become my PhD advisor, Matthew Green. And I find out about Bitcoin. And at the time, I'm like, I don't know if this Bitcoin thing is going to succeed, but it is going to have a massive privacy problem because a blockchain is public. It's Twitter for your bank account, and that just doesn't work. So I go to Matt and I tell him, I'm working in his lab, I'd like to sort of dabble on this on the side. This is at least an interesting mathematical problem of real world importance. And so we start working on how do we solve this problem. And the trouble is that in Bitcoin, cryptocurrency in general, there's nobody you can trust to hold a signing key. And so all of the history of payment sessions before then that people have done with cryptography, in fact, Bitcoin comes out of this legacy of eCash, all relied on untrusted bank. And that didn't work. And that's why Bitcoin took off where the other ones didn't. And so I start looking at these things called zero-knowledge proofs on how to do this. This is now, by this point, 2012. And we write a paper on how to do zero-knowledge proofs for Bitcoin anonymity. This is a paper called ZeroCoin. It was published in 2013. And it's a mix. It looks a lot like Tornado Cash, in fact, except it doesn't use ZK SNARKs because ZK SNARKs did not exist at that point. And it wasn't on Ethereum because Ethereum did not exist at that point. It's a while ago. Okay. So we build that, present the talk. I actually go to the Bitcoin conference in San Jose in 2013 and talk about it. And the Bitcoin developers stand up and say, we're not doing this. They're very polite about it. They had very good reasons for it. And I think they made the right call, but they wanted nothing to do with this. It also was not really that good and fast. So then the next paper we build turns into Zcash. It's the paper called Zero Cash. And this is where we bring in ZK SNARKs, some of my other co-authors, Ali Ben Sassan, who went on to Starkware, Matter Svirza, Aran Tromer, and build this academic paper. This is a full-blown payment system. It's not a mix on top of Bitcoin. It's actual privacy-preserving payments, variable value. And this, we decide, if this is it, we've got it. But none of us are going to quit our day jobs. We all want to stay in academia. Oh, okay. Apparently Ellie did, but he's not going to quit his day job for this. And so we go find Zuko to spin up the company and do the very, very hard work of setting up the culture and getting the engineering right to take what is grad student code and turn it into actually trusted, real world deployable stuff, and sets the tone for how you do SNARK security correctly when you commercialize this. Because this is the first application of zero knowledge proofs in industry, pretty much, period. It is bleeding edge, the first application of SNARKs anywhere. And SNARKs, for those of you who don't know, are succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge with this crazy system that lets you prove any program you want, any complicated statement in a fixed number of bytes. Concretely for the system, we were using 400 some odd bytes, sort of magic. that you use as a building block to build all these very interesting privacy-preserving protocols, starting with Zcash and then moving on to Zexy, smart contracts, and identity and reputation stuff that my lab in Maryland is working on now.
Okay, I want to probe a bit. So I know Ellie. I've met him a couple of times, and he's actually been on the podcast. So Ellie often, when he talks to me, he says, like, when I sort of truly understood SNARKs, once I understood CK Tech for the first time, to me, this was the most obvious unlock, really, and like maybe that he'd ever come across. And he, to this day, right, to his credit, and it seems like you probably would agree with this, he thinks that this is like, there's no doubt in his mind this is the future. If you could summarize this for somebody who is medium tech level, let's say, like, what in your mind at the time convinced you that like this is the privacy unlock, this is the unlock of the future? Like what is specifically about, like, so we hear about SNARKs, we hear about ZK constantly, right? And it obviously has gotten a tremendous amount of like venture capital investment, especially in the past few years. Reduce this down to something sort of simple. Like, why is this such a massive breakthrough in your mind?
Right. So actually, this is a very good point to bring up, and maybe actually a bit of contrast between myself and Ellie, because Ellie thinks of SNARKs as the thing itself, and I think of them as a tool that lets you build a lot of very useful things you want. It's actually quite hard to build those things correctly. So think of it this way. What if you could make dishonest parties who are out to get you honestly run programs? You can make them follow the rules you wrote down in the system, right? And those rules are actually stateful. They involve how much money you've had, how many bans you've gotten, how many upvotes, how many downvotes, how many transactions, what's your income, for example, for a know your customer scheme. Did you go to this school? Do you have these jobs? If you're trying to post on a forum anonymously, but say you have some qualifications. And so the unlock is that you can cause that to happen in a way that is private. You don't have to expose everything that's on your computer in this program that you're running, but the other party knows you did it correctly, right? So it's how do you trust without exposure, right? Trust without exposure. And the key thing that we got in Zcash, and we didn't entirely realize it at the time, and now really the arc of research further from that, is that we can do this where we keep actual state, like your account balance. A zero-knowledge proof on its own actually turns out to not be that useful, because if I prove to you that I have some money and I send it to you, well, I still had the money at some point in the past, so I can do the same proof to someone else. And so the complicated thing that Zcash does is this thing with nullifiers, where you prove a state and then you can't ever use that state again. And that's sort of the arc we're building on. So it's like a computer program that you can make somebody else run, even if they're dishonest, and you can be assured that they ran it and did the right result without having to expose all of their data, without them having to expose all of their data to you. So it's about trusting someone without having to expose them, or more so maybe it's about you being able to show someone else that they should trust you without you having to expose all of your details about them, whether that's for a payment or a forum post or logging onto a website.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to go back to something you said. You presented this Zero Coin paper in front of the Bitcoin conference. Bitcoiners have been aware to some extent, and some quite supportive. In fact, I think you can go back and see Satoshi alluding to something similar to ZK. You can see Hal Finney talking about like the potential for ZK. At the time, this also kind of ties into like maybe the modern day now. At the time, you said that they had zero interest in doing this. What was the rationale at the time? Was the tech not there? And then I'm going to kind of extend that question to, is the tech there now, in your opinion, and what has changed?
Yeah. So the tech is, I think, now there. So the reason Bitcoiners were not interested in this is, one, a lot of them didn't accept that there was a privacy problem, right? This is the thing that originally got me into cryptocurrency, is there's this privacy problem. I want to solve this issue of, social control and protecting people from the hostile governments that are out there. They might be yours, they might be other ones. And some Bitcoiners didn't acknowledge this. They were, in fact, very defensive about it. The second point is, even if you did care about that, the tech was not in 2013 there. I'd say by 2014, it was clear, but you wanted to be battle tested. Definitely by now, like, it's there. There are some downsides, but if you think you need privacy for this stuff, and I think it's pretty clear you do, that there isn't an alternative. There won't be. We did nail it, right? And I just want to be clear, by the way, when I say we, I mean like academically, collectively, Zcash and everybody, but this technology is open source. The papers are out there. Anybody can run with this. As I've said before, I'd be quite happy if the Bitcoin developers took the entire thing and ran with it themselves on an intellectual side. On the I like Zcash, maybe not. So on that, they were there. And then the third thing was there was this problem for a long time of nobody really wanted to touch privacy because it was perceived as legally and regulatory risky. So there were a number of people in Bitcoin, and actually small minority, I think, then maybe more so now that there's broader, less principled money involved, not coming from the cypherpunk ethos, who were willing to basically say privacy was the thing we would actually sacrifice to the regulatory gods. So we got Bitcoin out there. And they're like, actually, it's a feature that it's traceable. That is, in my opinion, one of the least cypherpunk things I've ever seen anybody do. I can understand how they did it. But that was, I think, the third undercurrent there.
That's interesting you say that. And it kind of, I'll have you elaborate on this because, and you may reject this premise altogether, and I'm sure also you've gotten this question a million times, but there is some, at least thought within Bitcoiners, that you have a trade-off, which is transparency auditability and then privacy. Do you kind of reject this spectrum, or where do you lie on this? Because this is something that I see often regurgitated, whether or not it's from, maybe whether or not it's from cryptographers is one thing, maybe it's just people kind of bull posting. But the fact of the matter is this is one thing that I think is often regurgitated amongst Bitcoiners, which is that, okay, you can have privacy, but you will never have this level of verifiability, as they call it, that one might want in terms of, total supply of coins. What are your thoughts on this? And again, I'm sorry, I'm sure you've gotten this question a million times.
It's a good question, right? So Bitcoin is Twitter for your bank account. Everything out there is public, and I believe we need privacy. That said, sort of fundamentally, if you make the system private enough you can't track what people are doing, you do lose some degree of verifiability in terms of the account balances. I don't think that most of the Bitcoin community who says this talking point understands how bad and problematic the privacy angle is, right? Especially when these things start getting used for real, right? Realistically, the past 10 years of cryptocurrency have been mostly speculation, and we are just now, with this uptick in stablecoins and chaos in the world, seeing interest in both Bitcoin and stablecoins. And when you start using it out in the reality, it's not just hold it and believe in Satoshi's vision, number goes up. You're getting some real operational security problems. And it's not just, hypothetically, the NSA might be after me or the Ministry of State Security in China. It's real people with adversaries who might kidnap you. It might be other governments if you're an activist. I don't think they understand that. And second of all, third of all, I think realistically, there isn't much you could do if you had a bug in, say, the Bitcoin supply now. Right, everybody gets one or two screw-ups. All the ZK projects, all the non-ZK privacy projects have probably had one or two inflation bugs. I think Bitcoin had a couple back in the day. But once you get large enough and there are enough eyes on you, if there's an inflation bug, someone's going to exploit it. And I don't realistically think Bitcoin could recover from that very much itself either. And so the solution is don't have those happen. And that means you need to be very careful about the code. You need to be very careful about formal verification. And it is definitely true that ZK stuff is more complicated, and so we should do more formal verification checking. But I don't think this, you can't verify risk is actually an issue. Because I suspect if you ever tried to verify it and it failed, you would be in for a world of problems, whether it was in ZK or not. And as long as everyone's like, okay, we did the checks, we did the groundwork, we know, we have reason to believe it's reasonably good, people will have confidence in it. And they'll be able to use it, which is the biggest thing. You can't use a non-private currency for real things.
Yeah, and kind of going off that, you alluded to, the first 10 years maybe primarily, if not exclusively, speculation, and perhaps we're now moving into an era where we've sort of figured out the viable use cases, and obviously privacy is more and more at the forefront. But I'm curious then if that's sort of the explanation for maybe the past 3 to 6 months of Zcash resurgence. I mean, maybe a better way to frame this is, you're right, there's it is, we've created the best, Twitter for your bank account that you could imagine. And you're right. I don't think people realize the degree to which everything is just far more public than any financial system we probably used before. But were you surprised that maybe in the past, half year, Zcash has been the one really to take the mantle, or was this very obvious to you because it's the most, viable candidate to come in and kind of take the torch, or however you want to call it. Like, I guess maybe in a little bit more, not to be too long-winded, but a little bit more on my side is like, I have been aware of Zcash since I probably first got into crypto, and I have heard Vitalik talk about it. I've heard, I have a couple of friends who are very, very into Zcash. I don't know if you know Janus, and then C-Node, both of them like have long been big proponents of Zcash, but I never really like thought much of it at all. And then, in the past, 3 to 6 months, it's been really like one of the kind of discussion points. So I'm curious if this to you has been surprising, or was it like, this was going to be the case all along?
It definitely was both. So, from 2011, Bitcoin's going to have a privacy problem. If it succeeds, we need to solve it. So I believed in this. And I remembered passionately having arguments with folks at ECC, Zuko, like, you need to build a wallet, you need to do this, you need to make this work. And then you didn't get much interest. Like, the price action was sort of with the market, so to speak. And so you just, like, I burned out, right? I went on to became the professor, did everything else. And hadn't actually thought much about the day-to-day of Zcash until it turns out they shipped a working wallet for the first time in ever, and added swaps into it. And between that and whatever social media, we've all been in cryptocurrency long enough to know that there's a mixture of social bits and technical bits. But whatever alchemy that is, it takes off. And not just do we have price, which I don't care about in my day-to-day life. We have people from the Bitcoin community, which I was very touched by, going like, yeah, this was the right way to do this, right? You guys, props to you on setting the tech the correct way and setting the culture the right way. Even if we don't like the coin, or we do like the coin, it doesn't matter. Clearly, this was the way to do it. And I feel like Zcash is the mantle for a private version of Bitcoin. There's this whole other arc of private stablecoins and tokenizing real-world assets that I think is yet to come, and will probably not be on Zcash, ironically, precisely because it seems to have hit this product market fit of it's Bitcoin, but encrypted. And so you don't want to go tarnish that with adding a bunch of other features. And so that is, I think, the next tsunami of money that will come into cryptocurrency, because that's real-world assets. That's people in other countries who need somewhere to save their money that's not pesos that go up in Argentina, go down, and then they want yield on it. And this is going to be this whole influx of stuff where when you start putting real amounts of money on chain, you really need privacy. So that's going to be stablecoins and real-world assets and all the ancillary things that have to come along with that for doing compliance to some degree or another, because you're holding stuff from U.S. companies. And that's sort of the next generation after Zcash, I think. And they're complementary. Much the same way that Bitcoin and Ethereum are complementary.
I wanted to ask a bit about, and we'll obviously come back to more Zcash stuff, but I want to ask a little bit about what the other projects you've worked on. So I was reading your bio on, I guess on University of Maryland website, actually, and all the different papers you'd worked on and written, and then actually some of the, I guess, projects you either contributed to or helped found. So is it Alio, and then also like some bolts? Like, can you talk me through some of the other work you've done, anything that might be of interest?
Right. So we did Zcash. I kept on with my PhD. We did this thing called Bolt, which was trying to do privacy preserving payment channels. Tech was good. Yeah. Market wasn't there for, I think, I'd claim a general payment channel, certainly not private.
Yeah.
I think the next big thing we did, the last paper I started in grad school, was this thing called Zexe, Z-E-X-E, on how to do zero knowledge execution, which is smart contracts. Because when we did Zcash, Ethereum literally did not exist, right? The Bitcoin 2013 conference, when I talked about Stablecoin, was apparently when Vitalik first had the Ethereum idea, and we start working on this as an academic thing. We don't actually really at the time, I don't think anyone really at the time understood exactly what smart contracts would be good for, but we need to build a privacy preserving version. So it's very much an academic speculative thing. And that was me and Matt Green and Sean Bowe from Zcash. The start of this thing is called Peta Verification Key Hash. It comes up with its own separate academic paper. And we end up working with one of the master's students at Berkeley, Howard Wu. And we're building this thing. And I think we didn't really understand what it was for until at some point, Howard and I are consulting with Libra, Mark Zuckerberg's blockchain project. This is how bizarre this world is, right? Mm-hmm. And we're out in Geneva for some reason. We're walking around the lake. And we're talking about where the future of this stuff is going to go, because it's not clear what you need a privacy smart contract for. And we have this idea of our thing at the time we called Conduit, which now has there's an unrelated project with a name, about just being able to ship money, stable coins, anything else back and forth from any given chain to any other chain with privacy and some amount of compliance. And this notion of it's going to be infrastructure for like real money, real equity, not this cypherpunk version of we're going to invent our own version of money that doesn't have to state. perfectly valid thing to do. This is, well, let's build, finance, but 21st century on a blockchain. And that's going to have to be encrypted because, of course, the moment you talk to any bank, they're like, yeah, we can't have a public blockchain. Nobody wants to know their customers' customers, an actual quote I have from a JP Morgan executive. And so this is like 2019. And that leads to the next project that I actually am formally advising, which is Aleo, which is a layer one privacy-driven smart contract system. For those of you who may know the Ethereum ecosystem, it's similar ideas. In fact, came out of the same paper as Aztec, but it's its own layer one. Howard goes and does all this hard work to raise a bunch of money, build the thing, get it listed on Coinbase on day one at launch, which is for a privacy coin basically unheard of. Right. That was actually the first indication I had before Zcash, actually, that maybe this privacy stuff had legs that other people cared about. Because getting major exchanges to buy in on, we are going to list a privacy thing day one when you're out was like a sea change. It's like, oh, okay, you guys actually see that there's some value in this. And it's not just risk exposure. And that I took as a positive sign for privacy as the cryptocurrency writ large.
Yeah. So talk to me a bit about then Aleo, or just maybe the design going forward with regards to real world assets interfacing with the real financial system to the extent that they want to engage. What does that look like? And do you think that is indeed the future? Like, obviously right now we see all of these institutions. I mean, a lot of these things are kind of marketing gimmicks, but regardless, there's a tremendous amount of like interest in both, stable coins and then just real world assets in general. But a lot of this stuff is happening on like these quite transparent chains that we've talked about. What are your thoughts? Like, so maybe you can use Aleo as an example, or like, how do you kind of think about this going forward?
Yeah. So let's split these two things, because I'm by heart and training a technologist. Let's talk about the technology, whether you think it's going to be Aleo or Aztec or something else, your question. I think banks will require privacy from the public, right? Whether that's on a layer two that rolls up onto something or its own layer one, that's a question. But they're going to need privacy, and they're going to need customizable rules. So, right, this starting back on Bitcoin is, if it succeeds, will have its privacy problem. The same thing is true for Ethereum, right? And the core thing that ZK enables is the ability to write down rules that the other person has to follow without exposing all of their details to verify they did them. And so what will happen, and what is happening with Aleo and Aztec and Miden and all these other projects that are based off of Zexy, is they're looking at offering people, banks, not banks, other entities that want to be financial, not quite FIs in the regulated sense, the ability to write a thing like Zcash in the conceptual sense of you can send that money back and forth, but add rules to it in whatever way you want. Maybe those are around issuance, maybe those are around identity, and you can program them. So this is what's called the record model from Zexy. And it's, instead of having just money and a nullifier in a Merkle tree in Zcash with a ZK proof about it, you have money, a nullifier, some arbitrary other state, and this program that you have to prove you followed. And that model lets you customize a number of things. And so what I think will happen is the demand here is going to come from the rest of the world that is increasingly wealthy, right, is developing. And once markets for their savings so they can get gains, right, because you want to pay for a house, pay for your daughter's education, whatever it is, but you don't trust your local financial system. It's corrupt. The governments debase the currencies, right, that they may just show up and take your money. Right, I've heard stories that in parts of Argentina, people keep their money in bricks because they're just building their house literally brick, and like it's a lot harder to steal bricks than cash under a mattress. And so cryptocurrency provides a means to do that, even if you don't have the ability to get a U.S. bank account, right? And you don't have the identity documents that would get you through a pretty rigorous, the onboarding frictions that banks just don't want to deal with. Cryptocurrency lets other market participants, other companies, offer those kind of services without having to have the same level of trust and regulation that a bank does, because they are potentially not custodying the assets. They are not subject to the same regulations. Cynically, people argue that some of this is just regulatory arbitrage, and some degree of it is, but the technology actually does change the trust relationships, right? There is, because it's a blockchain, because it's distributed, because you can do keys and things like ledgers and wallets, there is actually less trust in this, whoever this company is that's building a wallet or your counterparty for the savings, that you maybe don't need the full heavyweight notion of a bank charter and the state and federal banking regulations for these things, depending on what financial products they'll offer.
Let me take a moment to talk to you about Ellipsis Labs, a team I've known for a while building some of the most interesting products in the space. The Ellipsis team is one of the few that I can consistently point to and say, these guys really know what they're doing. They're backed by Paradigm, Electric Capital, and Hahn Ventures. The founders, Eugene and Jerry, have experience at Citadel, Jane Street, and the Solana Core team. Since launching their order book DEX, Phoenix, they've done over $80 billion in trading volume by making on-chain order books competitive with centralized exchanges. They are also the team behind Gavel and SolFi. I would consider them the foremost experts in crypto market microstructure. The best part is Ellipsis is hiring for New York-based engineers. Work with a small, focused team who are results-driven, collaborative, and use a modern stack. If you're an engineer who wants to work on infrastructure that's already proving itself in the market, go to ellipsislabs.xyz. Okay, now back to the show. It seems like the current administration under which we live is obviously much more favorable towards crypto, but that seems mainly to apply more, well, from at least what I read into it, more from the securities and just kind of allowing for innovation in general. Like that part seems pretty patently clear. The privacy aspect is less clear. Obviously, we still see Tornado Cash, the Samurai devs. What do you think that there's been any shift in that domain? And then also maybe as an extension of that question, how do you feel? I mean, you're obviously like a real member of society. You're not, and I don't mean that to say that, random kind of cypherpunk anonymous devs are not, but you are public facing, you work at a, public institution. How, like, do you feel any concern, and maybe do you feel any type of, are you optimistic or pessimistic about, maybe generally regulation around privacy specifically?
I'm optimistic, even back to, of all things, the Biden administration, which is, I know, like a four-letter word in much of cryptocurrency. There were people, because I'm in DC, around the Department of Justice, around Treasury, around other agencies, who could tell that like privacy was legitimate and we needed it. Where the rubber meets the road is on how much control they want over it. Yes, some people do, in fact, want backdoors. These get referred to as view keys. But typically, they just want to know that if bad things happen, they can stop it, right? They can do something. And if you're a cypherpunk and you're doing the free speech maximalist, well, there's nothing you can do about it. It's unstoppable internet money. The government's general response is, oh, yeah, well, just watch us. And if they can't do anything else, they would do something to you. This is a real politics comment, not a comment on constitutionality of law, right? It's a general point. However, for when you can tell them something you can do, like, hey, do KYC, know your customer, on the off ramps and on ramps for exchanges. This is what Zcash did to get listed in NYDFS approval for Gemini in New York, which was a major thing that Tyler and Cameron Winklevi did for privacy of cryptocurrency, or things like Alien or NASDAQ who go around and say, we can do these programmable regulations where you don't expose any data, but you will prove that you're not on a watch list or that your patterns are not illicit looking. Governments tend to be understanding. They tend to be at least like, well, we will see if that works. Now, of course, if it ends up being a complete boondoggle and 90% of the money going through it is criminal, that's a different story. The best case, and if you have enough lawyers and you're careful, you will follow the law, you'll be fine. But I would expect you will get like delisted from exchanges and sort of shut down. And personally speaking, for me, if something I worked on turned out to be 90% actual criminals, and I don't mean like debatable, we may have different notions of what a crime is and what states should look like, but like, people kidnapping folks to do pig butchering scams in Myanmar. If that was 90% of some cryptocurrency, I'd be like, maybe I'll walk away from this. But I don't think it will be, because there's all this real legitimate demand from Wall Street and the world for serious capital influx from other countries, access for real assets for markets, and this requires privacy. And that will have a little bit of illicit activity on it, but the legitimate banking system has illicit activity on it, right? HSBC laundered money for Al-Qaeda, and they got told basically, don't do that again. And they got really told, don't do that again. They had to have more robust AML KYC protocols. But similarly, you can build these things for cryptocurrency. And so I think as long as you understand that dynamic and you are actually providing useful stuff to the world, you're fine. And paradoxically, if you're not, well, find something else to do with your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I think you're spot on with regards to banks always just get slaps on the wrist. It's, if you go back and look at all of the amount of illicit funds they move, like it really is kind of jading, at least from my perspective. But one thing I wonder about, and this is, I don't have necessarily an opinion on this, but I definitely see kind of conflicting views. And I guess you kind of alluded a bit to an answer here, but when you think about kind of like a pragmatic approach to privacy versus a very sort of absolutist approach, where do you kind of fall? And I think the reason, this is often a subject for debate is because a lot of the cypherpunk or like most, maximally, like again, absolutist privacy advocates will say that any inch the government will take a yard, right? And like if you give them any opening, they will, exploit that. And that's why it's best to, assume that if something is 90% illicit, so be it, on the grounds that it is, if we open this up in any capacity, then this will completely sort of supplant the entire premise of what we're doing. Where do you fall on that? I mean, I think I kind of gleaned a bit, but I'm curious if you have like a more direct answer, maybe, or maybe specifically with like stuff you work on too.
Yeah, so this is a real question. So I'm not going to give you a direct answer because it varies. So for things like encrypted messaging and things like that, absolutists, like you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. For things like cryptocurrency, I think I don't need to have an opinion because here's what's going to happen. There already are multiple different options out there. Zcash is much more on the cypherpunk side of it. There are no view keys that the government can see that are built in. For things like Aleo and Aztec, right, there's these privacy preserving systems we built that are built out of Zexy. You get to define the rules. And so there will be, even on just say Aleo, different stablecoins with different rules of how they do KYC, AML, what they require. Some of them will almost certainly require a view key that just lets Chainalysis or KRM or somebody just see everything. But at least it's not public. Others of them won't want that because it's a liability from an international governance standpoint of, okay, you give the Americans access, but well, what about these? What about this? You don't want to deal with it. And as a researcher, my desire is to produce tools that give you ways to manage this without just creating a honeypot of data. So I don't think of YuKey as a good idea from just a security standpoint. It'll get hacked. It'll get used for all kinds of stuff. We already had it in the United States, from a U.S. perspective, I said in D.C., right? The Experian credit reporting database was stolen by another nation state, allegedly, to go figure out who had security clearances, they'd already stolen that database, and had financial trouble. Right? You don't want that kind of financial data falling into
I think multiple credit agencies have been exploited, in fact.
There have been multiple. There have been people buying insurance companies to get the same kind of data for folks that, I think it was the CIA. Like, nation states actually understand they don't want other nation states to have this data. And so I think you actually will get interest in privacy preserving tools for doing AML, KYC, right? And what will happen is there'll be sort of marketplace for ideas where we have different blockchains, Ethereum, Aztec, Aleo, whatever it is, with different techniques on them because we have this Zexy style, make people follow the rules. And then we'll see which ones work out, right? Where does the money go, right? On the one hand, you want a cypherpunk thing. On the other hand, like, you want safety to know you're not getting scammed. And I'm actually curious which preference legitimately someone should get to choose, which they'll actually pick. I think, unfortunately, and I identify this as a cypherpunk, at least on the messaging side for secure messaging, those opinions are in the minority, growing, thankfully, right? We have gotten much more pushback against things like chat control because it's clearly bad. But I suspect we end up in some weird equilibrium of various different stablecoins with different compliance policies. And that'll be, you can choose which regulatory regime you're in, and you get optionality. And that to me sounds like probably both the best case we could ask for in these situations and where we will end up.
Yeah. Okay, let's come back to Zcash now for a bit. There's this, I think you mentioned it before, this proposed, is it an upgrade? You'll have to talk to me about it, but Tachyon, and then there's a bunch of excitement around Zcash right now. Like, how do you view the current state? And then, maybe going forward, like where does Zcash fall specifically, like kind of in the marketplace?
Yeah. So in terms of Zcash, the marketplace, I'm a cryptographer. I do cryptocurrency, but I do the crypto side of it, not the currency side of it. I think the main thing is, it's going to be scaling, right? So the fun thing with Zcash, right, is that the solution for scaling blockchains has also been ZK SNARKs, right? The big interest in my end is this privacy stateful programmer follow the rules, but you can also use them as a sort of blockchain trash compactor, right? You send someone all your data, they take everyone else's data, they compact it into a cube, they put it on chain. That, by the way, does not add any privacy. Important point. A lot of those companies working on that now go, oh, we're private. It's like, no, technically the proof's on ZK, but more importantly, you sent them all their data, they saw all of it. It's not private. But that is how you do scaling. And so the cool bit is, since Zcash already has ZK SNARKs built into it, making a scaling solution out of it is a lot more straightforward than something like, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum even, where you have to go like re-architect the thing. Like, so Tachyon is Sean Bo's proposal. Sean is this brilliant kid we met by, was hired into Zcash and has just gone and done. I've written a couple of papers with him now at this point. Notions of how do you do aggregating transactions together, this trash compactor, but these are ZK transactions, so they're actually private, and you stuff them together. And then it turns out to get that to work, you need to do some changes to how the actual underlying cryptography works for payments, the nullifier stuff. So this is evolving nullifiers. Is this paper Sean and I put on ePrint 2 or 3 weeks ago. And that is just kind of exciting because it's sort of redesigning the details of how Zcash works to make it scale from like something like, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum up to potentially something completely crazy, like Solana, or even, I mean, everybody talks about Visa level scales. Nobody will ever get there. But for this, at least the cryptography would scale there. To be very clear, the consensus almost certainly won't. I'm not a consensus expert, but I don't think you would get a distributed system that runs at Visa scales. I'd love to be proven wrong there. I have no expertise, but whatever you can scale consensus to generically, the cryptography is no longer the limiting rate there. So that's the really exciting thing for Zcash. That, the wallet, and then surprisingly swaps, which like just sort of have taken off in a way that I don't, well, assuming it's organic. Just like, it's kind of really interesting. You just swap to anything you want.
Yeah, like can you just give a high level as to how that works? Like I think there's this, right, near intense has been sort of the talking point, and then obviously I've messed around with the Zashi wallet. Okay, so I am like somewhat familiar, but like, walk me through this idea of like the swaps, and then what are we gaining there? Maybe like privacy wise, and then I guess like what has been, why has that been surprising to you?
Yeah, so the two things. First of all, the fact that there's this so much usage is nice. Again, assuming it's organic, right? It's nice to think of these things in theory all the way back to 2011 or when we launched Zcash. Like there should be demand there, but it's really nice to see it validated. So what happens with swaps? I guess finance people might call it disintermediation, right? Instead of having to go to an exchange or an OTC desk or whatever it is to find someone to swap with, you just broadcast what is called an intent, which is, hey, I'd like to swap from this currency, Zach, in the case of Zcash, to something else, and you give some parameters about what allowable slippage. And then there's this network, which I think in Near's case is a blockchain, but there are various protocols to do this. Near is not the only one. There's Houdini Swap, there's a couple of others. That basically goes and match makes you with somebody else and says, hey, you will do this swap with them.
Yeah.
And it's not quite then an atomic two people sign things, because that's actually not possible. There's an impossibility result about atomic exchange of signatures, and even cross-chain atomic swaps, which have stronger primitives and signatures, you can't quite get to work because of a race condition. So that counterparty you found, so the matchmaker, actually guarantees the transaction. They put up collateral. There are a couple of ways to do it. And as long as it goes through, then you get your money. And if not, they make you whole and you're fine. I believe that's how this works. Don't quote me on this. Do your own research on each individual protocol. And so what this means is you are basically just swapping them out without really worrying about who's you're swapping with, because your trust relationship isn't with them. It's with Near or Houdini or whoever. And even then, you're only exposed for the duration it takes the swap to settle, right? It's not like these things for bridges, where if you take wrapped assets, like wrapped Bitcoin onto Ethereum, the bridge is holding the underlying Bitcoin in a wrapped thing, in a vault, so to speak. And if their keys get hacked, any point in the future where you're holding the wrapped Bitcoin, your money's gone.
Yeah.
Versus on the swap, it's like it's an ephemeral exposure. And so this is one of these things of doing these sort of interesting kind of programmable finance things where your counterparty risk is minimized. And I think there are a lot of things that will look like this for stablecoins, for various other bits of this. Because there's maybe a better way to run things than bridges, where you can do it. It doesn't all work for everything.
Yeah. Okay. So then, like, moving off this, then there's been a lot of interest, and the price has gone up a lot, which is typically good because there's sort of a reflexive effect there, whereby more people are buying it. And then also we've seen a large increase in deposits into the shielded pool, which is just overall a positive statement at the very least. Increasing the anonymity set, and it just shows that there's some traction here. Again, I don't know too much about like who's doing this and like, but regardless, it's happening, and at the very least, it's brought the privacy discussion to the forefront. With regards to Zcash specifically, and I know you are a cryptographer first and foremost, and so you probably don't have much care with, about markets or, the day-to-day market sentiments. But what do you see as the next step? Like, do you view Zcash as the obvious competitor to Bitcoin? Do you view it as a medium of exchange, right? Like, do you view this as something where people are sending remittances privately, right? Like people using this to get around like totalitarian governments? Like, where do you see this going? Like, at least, to the extent that you do think about this stuff, like what in your mind is the next steps for Zcash beyond just a bunch of people on crypto Twitter, right, getting like excited that it's done a 10x or 20x?
Yeah. So I guess there are two paths, and I do not know which one I would take. So there is one path definitely for ZK technology in general. As I've said before, this programmable, adding assets, doing identity, the work that I'm currently doing in my lab. How do you do identity? How do you do reputation? This can be for payments, real world assets. How do you know who you're swapping with if they're qualified? That is one arc it could take. The other arc it could take is it stays very minimal and it's just scalable encrypted Bitcoin. And those are complementary things. I am reasonably confident at this point that both paths will be taken by the broader cryptocurrency market. If it's not Zcash that does the assets thing, it will be Aleo, Aztec, Midin, Anoma, something like that. Or it may be Zcash that does it. They're both options. There are proposals to do what are called Zcash shielded assets, ZSAs, in Zcash, which are pretty trivial actually to do, add support for stablecoins or any other asset, right? It's just an ID of the type in the coin. It's unclear to me if those will go through or not. If the community has this ethos of it's now just encrypted Bitcoin, it might not.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if they want to be able to do dollars as well, they might, right? I think stablecoins are a future, right? There is also a role for this sort of Bitcoin style money. And yeah, I guess if the Bitcoin folks are not going to add privacy, I would say that something is going to be with privacy is going to be the successor to Bitcoin. And Zcash is currently speaking the longest running, most battle tested run with strong privacy. Yeah, that seems to be the consensus of everybody.
So like with regards to Bitcoin, like you say, if Bitcoin doesn't do privacy, first of all, do you care at all? Like, out of curiosity, do you care at all? You said you came into the space through Bitcoin as many others did, but at this point, it's like there's a lot of contentiousness with trying to change Bitcoin. So who knows, right? So the first question is, do you care at all? But then the second question is, if they were to take some like privacy centric path, what would that look like in your mind? And how much of Bitcoin would need to be torn up altogether, right? Like, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. So the first answer is I would be happy to help, but I don't care for the politics and the it's a whole mess. I just straight up don't care. Right. I am avowedly of the, if you tell me you can't do it, I will make my own blockchain so I can do it. And we've done that twice. So, in terms of what would have to be changed, it depends, right? If they wanted to do it for real on the layer one, you'd have to tear up a bit of stuff. Like we literally went through this process for building the original Zero Cash paper. It's not hard per se. There's some risk and some tricks, and I don't really know if the appetite there from the core devs to do that kind of a pretty big re-architecture. The other option is to try to do it as a roll-up with some kind of like cat op return nonsense. I haven't tracked all the details, which strikes me as incredibly complicated. It's going to have some privacy problems. How do you pay fees? Some problems of how do you generate the proofs? Because again, you can't just say, hey, I want to do this move and have somebody else do the proof, because that's not private. And that's what those current roll-up models are, right? You can't do the blockchain trash compactor for that. And then finally, the original biggest objection the Bitcoin folks had to things like Zcash was the math's too complicated, the system's too complicated, you're going to introduce bugs, right? And it's a reasonable worry. But if they go down this roll-up route, it's 20 times worse. Right, the proofs are more complicated because you're doing more complicated stuff. There's so many more bugs you could get, basically just to avoid some political problems, and that will be kind of funny if that's what happens. I think it's the most likely course of what happens for a privacy solution. I'd say the most likely thing is they don't do one, though. Is
there any privacy solutions or compromises? Now, you may disagree with whether or not they're sufficient, but are there any privacy solutions or, again, compromises that work in your mind So, for example, there's some things on, so there's mixers on Bitcoin, right? We know this. There's silent addresses, which I don't think is like a massive unlock, but it does allow you to have a lot of addresses with basically a single, single static key. And then there's also some ideas like pay join. Anyways, my point is, like, there are some people working on these, but it's not ZK stuff. Is there anything outside of ZK stuff with regards to privacy that could scale, not necessarily for Bitcoin, but just in general? Or are you kind of fixated on, or not fixated, but dead set that like the only like proper long-term steel, battle tested way to do this is with ZK Tech?
I think the only long-term battle tested way to do it is ZK Tech. There are other compromises, but they don't really provide good privacy, particularly sort of the cliche, but in the age of AI, almost all of these things fall apart. They realistically fall apart before then, but it was a little hard to say, look, some analyst over somewhere can do this. It's like, now really you can just look and see the patterns.
Yeah.
They might be paradoxically easy and good enough for criminal usage, because if you're a low-rate criminal, your adversary is not the National Security Agency, the CIA, or the Ministry of State Security. It's like your local police. And you could do something that will hide from that. But it's not actually good enough for normal users because it's not usable. It doesn't provide them privacy from like targeted advertising or if you work for a defense contractor from somebody trying to recruit you. So no, those solutions don't work, especially in the age of AI. There are a couple of interesting ideas I've heard for like, we're going to do some multi-party computation system where we just swap Bitcoins without moving them on chain. This is, from a privacy standpoint, it works perfectly well up to the nodes getting compromised. But the problem is it means basically you have to trust those nodes both for privacy and to hold the money, because like they're holding shares of the keys. If they go down, if they get hacked, they steal it. And so it's a totally fine privacy tech because it doesn't leak anything outside of this. But it strikes me as you couldn't really put large amounts of money into it, right? It's not scalable in the you can scale in terms of throughput, you can scale in terms of size, but there's also scalability in terms of security, right? If you put enough money in a system that involves 5 trusted parties, those 5 trusted parties are going to hack by the North Koreans.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are viable solutions there. Actually, I wish the coin swap maybe was the name of the last really cool one I heard someone talking about. I could be messing up, but it's like,
I think I know what you're talking about.
Cool idea. What?
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah. You basically like trade, like, what was the analogy people use? Like, it's like you trade a bunch of virtual open dimes. Yeah. So I understand the premise. Again,
I haven't looked at it in detail. I don't even know if it's still alive. But that was one I heard. It's like, okay, that's cool. That actually doesn't have a privacy problem. Like I said, I don't think it's scalable for other reasons, but that was a cool one.
Yeah. And what about with regards to Ethereum? Like, I think that there's most recently this whole idea of like the ZK VM, but I'm not sure that really applies so much to the privacy aspect as much as the like just pure play scaling, right? So what Ethereum does seem to be a lot more, at least publicly receptive to like just the privacy development in general. And Vitalik obviously, has been a big supporter of Zcash since inception. Yeah. What do you think about like kind of Ethereum in this regard going forward?
Right. So Vitalik is definitely interested in privacy. He and I talk somewhat frequently. The current perspective that Ethereum is taking is exactly this Zexy style solutions that they're building. Is one of them. Currently, they're doing it as various layer 2s, right?
Yeah.
And so the problem there is that it's not quite the right UX. So some nasty problems about how you pay fees, but it could work. It's, I think, easier to build these things in from the start and into the base layer. Rollups are a little more complex, but it could happen. There's a sort of a question: is Ethereum sticky enough for people to stay, or they move to things that have layer 1 privacy natively? It's an interesting question there. But sorry, there's another aspect to your question that I'm forgetting.
No, that was basically, I was just like generally with regards
ZKVMs.
to. Oh, well, yeah. But
so ZKVMs are were primarily, again, meant for scaling, the blockchain trash compactor. But the financing from this has built these things up to the point where actually you could start now with some tweaks, getting to run what's called client-side on a computer for client-side proving. And then you can build them to do privacy-preserving smart contract systems. And that is actually going to be the future of all this stuff. Because ZK proofs, everyone gets excited about different ZK proofs. They really are at this point a commodity. It's like faster microprocessors in the 90s. You don't care if it's a Pentium 3 or Pentium 4 or an AMD, whatever. You just care as someone building the internet that the thing will keep getting better and it will meet you when you have some application demands, right? Or for games, right? Like it'll always be fast enough in 2 years.
Yeah.
Zk VMs are one of the ways that happens. And we can start now thinking about all these interesting protocols to build on top of that for reputation, for identity, for payments, for how do we do social proof? How do we like download our entire Uber history and give you a proof? I have an Uber history over the past 10 years. I've spent this much money on it. I'm probably not a bot because I would have spent like $5,000 with Uber or whatever. I don't want to go look at that number. It's going to be depressingly large. So this is sort of the commodity thing that enables us, right? And so there's some amazing projects there. Risk0 has done an amazing job with tooling. Jolt out of A16Z Crypto Research and Georgetown from Justin Thaler is really doing the sum check stuff and getting really impressive results. Of course, Cairo and Ellie have been were the people who did the first stuff there. They're more so in the server scaling setting so far. I'm excited for them to get ZK stuff added back in whenever they will have that happen, because these are commodities now, and we can start building really cool protocols on top of them. It's not trivial, by the way, right? It's not like, oh, just go run Rust code and you have a secure protocol. The Rust code will run, but actually figuring out what to write to secure this stuff, that is actually in my opinion, one of the harder problems. I mean, it's what I've spent my entire career doing, is using these tools as primitives to build larger secure protocols.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, this is a little bit out of left field, but there has like long been a lot of, well, it makes sense, but there's long been a lot of contention between Monero people and Zcash people. Obviously, you fall on the Zcash people side. Mm-hmm. I followed it off and on, but for the most part, I'm this is a little bit outside of my domain. Talk to me about, I guess, like the high level differences between Monero and Zcash, and like also why is this? Why does there seem to be so much kind of like conflict and it doesn't seem like people are on the same side here. What is your take on this?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So Monero and Zcash are both privacy preserving cryptocurrencies. They differ heavily on how they're technically done. Okay. So caveat: Monero. Obviously, I'm involved in Zcash. I'm biased. Two, Monero has a lovely, sometimes toxic, but effective, lovely community that I really appreciate the work they've got into building that. Monero and Zcash sort of went with two different routes. Monero sort of embraced, we run the dark web. They are all on the darknet markets. That's a result. They got delisted by a number of exchanges, but frankly got more traction years ago because that was the only real use case. Zcash, on the other hand, was like, no, we're legitimate. We have KYC stuff on exchanges, not built into the protocol on exchanges. We got NYDFS licensing to be used on Gemini, and didn't want to touch the darknet market stuff at all. So there's an ethos difference. The larger problem, and this is now on my like computer scientist, I'm an expert in this stuff hat, Monero does not offer good privacy, right? So in Zcash, you use a zero knowledge proof to eliminate all of the data. Caveat: if you use the shielded transactions, there is a transparent version of it that for a long time, by the way, was like 90% of the transaction volume. So the legitimate criticism from Monero people was, Zcash is private, you use that stuff, but nobody does. I think Monero, on the other hand, is basically like, in a certain sense, Bitcoin, where in Bitcoin, if I pay you, I identify the exact source of who paid me. And Monero works the same way, except in order to hide that, because that's obviously a bad idea, you hide the amounts, which doesn't matter too much. They do that fine. And then you hide who paid you by picking a couple of decoy sources. Originally, it was like 2, and now it's up to, I believe, 10. And the problem there is the decoy stuff does not work well. It leaves all kinds of patterns and all kinds of ways to screw up using it, even if you implement it safely. And it's basically impossible to implement it safely. There are all kinds of, how do you pick the decoys? What distribution do you pick? How does it match legitimate spending? They've had bugs for this multiple times. I found one at one point when I started as a professor. I just reported it to them, didn't even make a big deal out of it. And it's just very difficult to get right. And it's basically not good privacy tech. And I will say, to the Monero people's credit, much as they argue about it, they are slowly moving on to this thing called FCMP, full chain membership proofs, which are basically the approach that Zcash takes, right? They do an accumulator, I think this Merkle tree over everything, and they do a ZK proof about it. And that should eliminate the conceptual bugs in Monero. Implementation bugs are a different story.
Got it.
And so this is their moving over to the ZK approach, right? Which is because that's the thing everybody believes is the way to do it.
One criticism of Zcash, which I have understood, and I'm not necessarily saying this from the perspective of Monero people, but just in general, was there's like this block portion of the block reward that goes to developers. Is that going to do you think that stays in the future? I mean, obviously, I think that Zashi was get, like a lot of the funding of Zashi came out of that. So clearly did some good work, right? But I think that is one like point of contention, and especially those in Bitcoin, and then Monero people obviously, and then about crypto in general, I think have some objection to that. Like what is it, will that always be there, and like kind of how does that work actually as well?
So so what this was called originally, and it's changed names because what it did is change. So there was I think 4-year thing called what Zugo, as the worst naming ever, called the Founders Reward, which was actually, in order to build Zcash, we had to raise approximately $3 million, which is ungodly cheap by standards of what it takes to build a modern blockchain. And that required investors and a way to pay them back and to hire the developers. And that was 10% of the blocks for X amount of time. And then that changed over a different model. And now there's some weird retroactive funding model. It's a third version of this that you get to like pick it, and then there's some vote. And I have no idea on the details of this, because again, this happened after I was like, okay, I'm out of Zcash for a bit in terms of the governance stuff. So it's been around. Really, at this point, I think persists kind of as FUD, right? In the sense of
I'm sure.
every single, like, it's not a lie, and the name was horrible. But when Zcash launched, this was like maybe one of the few things that did this. Every single blockchain now that launches has to fund its development. And this is exactly how they do it, but they call it a treasury. And it supports future developments, things like Zashi, things like your wallet, things like even just product placement, not product placement, like partnerships. Like if you go to like Sui or Aptos and you look at what they're doing, that's how that's funded, right? That's how Ethereum does this. That's what the Ethereum Foundation's budget comes from.
Yeah.
And even in the case of like Bitcoin and Monero, it's true, at least in the Bitcoin case, that there wasn't a pre-mine. I don't recall what Monero did. There's some hilariously interesting stuff about the history of CryptoNote, the thing before Monero and where it came from. And Monero is not CryptoNote, so I don't want to accuse them of doing something. But there were some weird things there. But in both cases, what happened was there were whales who made money because the market went up. And then they were effectively funding it behind the scenes.
Yeah. Still to this day, in fact. Yeah.
Still to this day. And so that funding model actually isn't really different. You're just arguing over whether you were overt about it, or when it wasn't doing well, you acquired a bunch of stuff because you had the means and then pumped it up. I don't really think that's much of a difference, especially because, again, almost everything after Ethereum, including Ethereum, does treasuries, right? That's just how blockchains are financed. Is it good? Yeah. Maybe not. Is it common? Sure. And I don't find those people going and complaining about those chains. They just somehow pick it against Zcash. I think partially because it was a terrible name when it started. That was the worst possible name for what that was.
No, I completely agree with regards to just like funding in general. And I think it's like a lot more similar than people want to give credit for across the board. So, and like the Ethereum people, Bitcoin people will FUD Ethereum people, and Ethereum people will FUD the Solana people because the pre-mine was open to anybody. And then Solana was just on CoinList or whatever, right? So everyone has their kind of like little, minutia that they argue over, which is more fair. But with that said, is that okay, maybe perhaps it's FUD, but is that an impediment going forward, do you think, to just like something like Zcash really taking hold as, I don't know, a real asset that people want to hold? Is that FUD worthwhile in your mind, to have that if
so I don't know. I think generally it's perceived that it's useful that cryptocurrencies have the ability to maintain themselves and do funding. I will say that the last time I was really paying any attention to the cryptocurrency governance for Zcash was 2021. I was on the board of the foundation. I did my term and resigned. I was sort of the opinion at that point that the dev fund, or whatever they were calling it, should go away because there was too much internal bickering over who got the money. And there wasn't enough of a sense of mission and purpose. Zcash had gotten a bit away from it's about privacy stupid, which was my opinion of what it should be. For those of you who are old enough to get Bill Clinton, it's the economy stupid references. And now that might be different, right? There might be back to being a unity of purpose, and then it's actually reasonable to hand out the money. But that's the risk. I don't think it's a risk of people worrying about, where's the tax going? Because people are used to paying taxes or paying premiums to pay for things. I actually don't think that's a problem. It may be a risk in terms of the longevity of the project and how it's governed, because it could create this attractive nuisance of this pot of money. Right. And that is a thing that we should be vigilant on. Success and purpose is helpful there, right? If the people involved, and this is one of the really nice things to have sort of woken up and found out one day, watching like there being multiple orgs and like Sean Bowe going off and doing Tachyon and like working with him on that stuff, or I'm just talking to him and I'm like sort of some point in the course I find out that there's a company and he's raised some money and he's hiring some people and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll ship some people your way that I know of. It's like, oh, well, there's actual interest in people doing this, and there's like more people who care in the community, and then maybe I trust them more with the money to have the right purpose and the communities can do the right thing. If things get dark again and there aren't enough people involved, then you can understand, well, it's just people fighting for money because they just want stuff. And that's a risk. So that's the thing you should be vigilant about. And that goes for anywhere that has a treasury. And I think even realistically, things that don't. Like, because if you have some whale who's funding it, he's got the same problem of he's got to judge who to hand it out to and whether they're real people or not. And that is a long-term risk in general for any project.
Okay, I had one last question, and it's pretty unrelated, but because I am fortunate enough to have a storied cryptographer and computer scientist on, I thought it is no better time to ask, what are your thoughts on quantum? You can just start rambling. I want to hear them.
Yeah. Okay. So broadly, in terms of like quantum, I think is a bit overrated. It's been overhyped for years. There is an intersection with my research, as you're asking, about breaking encryption, right? Can quantum computers break encryption? And the answer is eventually maybe. And so if you're building things like signal encrypted messaging or TLS on the internet, it's a good idea to hedge against this. You can deploy what's called post-quantum crypto, and it's not that expensive to do. Similarly, if you're doing ZK proof systems, it's actually rather easy to switch from a pre-quantum ZK proof system to one that's post-quantum. And in fact, there's a particularly interesting point here that there are two things you could be worried about with quantum computers. One of them is someone has one now, and then they can decrypt stuff and forge signatures. You probably would have some warning there. The boogeyman really for security and encryption is what's called a store now, decrypt later adversary. Right? So you're going to record everybody's messages for like 100 years. And then when you finally have a quantum computer, you can go back and decrypt it. And so if you're like a government, this scares the hell out of you. And indeed, the American government has put huge amounts of money into NIST and the National Security Agency modernizing US government communications and the requirements that you do it if you're banks and other people. And that's the reason. The interesting thing there for ZK proofs is that most of these things are actually private even with post-quantum with quantum computers. They're statistically ZK no matter what. So you don't lose privacy. But if someone built a quantum computer 100 years from now, couldn't go back and read your transactions, they could go back and do anything. They could forge money going forwards. There's some caveats here about how the exact protocols work. But the real question for cryptocurrencies, for those that don't use ZK, is what do you do about like Bitcoin signatures? What do you do about Ethereum signatures? When do you move over? Because it's costly. The one problem with post-quantum signatures is they're like 20 kilobytes, 5 kilobytes, 20 kilobytes. They're huge compared to a standard signature, which is like maybe 30 bytes, 32, 64 bytes. And it's an interesting question there where now you really do care about timelines because you've got to figure out when you're going to spend the money in the political world to do it. So there's this debate going, particularly in Bitcoin, of like, are we screwed? How screwed? How soon? Right? When do we put the effort in? And now the funny thing is then there's an incentive to actually start quibbling over timelines. Right? As a cryptographer outside of cryptocurrency, I'm like, yeah, fine. Just do post-quantum encryption. Please spend your money securing the pre-quantum internet too, because that's where most of the threats are. But since it's not that expensive, go spend it over there. For Bitcoin and things that aren't already doing ZK, there's this real question of, okay, what do you prioritize? And how fast? And it's not clear because it's very hard to estimate these things.
This guy, Scott Aronson, I think is his name, he recently came and I guess he's been primarily kind of a not skeptic, but just been like quite conservative on timelines. And now he seems increasingly, he seems like there's been some real breakthroughs, but again, like for me, obviously it's like extremely hard to parse what's going on. I tend to lean towards skepticism on this stuff, right? Because I saw Silicon Valley, salivate over the room temperature semiconductor for 6 days. So I'm of the opinion that okay, I'll let the experts in the room talk, but so I would defer more to somebody like you than, a host of the All In Pod. But where are you in thinking about this?
So this is a good question. So the problem is I am not an expert in the room. This is exactly, this is in general, you have cryptographers who are skeptical broadly, and the quantum people claiming, oh, we finally have a breakthrough. And the two camps don't really know how to assess the stuff.
Right.
So Scott is a world-class quantum computer science training quantum researcher. I think to me the question is how many qubits do you need, right? Because just because you have a working quantum computer, is it ENIAC, right? The first thing we ever built. Is it like a adding machine or a calculator, or is it an NVIDIA, GPU you use to run an LLM, to run OpenAI? And the thing that I think I haven't seen anyone really discuss is how do you get from one to the other? Because it's not scientific breakthroughs, at least for microprocessors, that got us from a transistor, Morris and Shockley, all the way to a GPU and an OpenAI data center. That was a whole flywheel of the next application, financing the next one, financing the next one. And no one's been able to give me a good timeline on what are the stepping stones to that. How many quantum qubits do you really, because you need thousands of qubits to break RSA, for example, tens of thousands, depending on what you think they'll re-break these error correcting codes. Are those just going to come out de novo because we can finance that from venture just to break quantum encryption? Or are we going to have to have a stepping stone of applications for quantum chemistry, quantum whatever, and then finally in 10 or 50, whatever the timeline is, could be 3 years, we get to the quantum computer ones. Like how much forewarning will we have? And so a really bizarre thing, and this is anecdote one from a friend of mine, Alex Pruden, who was the CEO of Aleo for a while. Fascinating story. Guy used to be at Greenberry, then an MBA at Stanford. And now he's doing a thing called Project 11, which is trying to do quantum security for Bitcoin. And he's, of course, shilling quantum because he needs to raise money. But he told me this interesting anecdote that some of the quantum computing companies, I think he specifically said Ionic, they used to raise money on quantum chemistry, various other applications. And now they're raising money on, we're going to break Bitcoin and recover lost money. I've seen this. And this is actually where I started to go recently to the, maybe this stuff is bullshit. Because that just sounds like it's completely crazy. First of all, again, I think you have to build a bunch more computers to get there. But second of all, okay, first of all, there's a legal question there. Like if you recover, it's still like, are you going to, so this is going to change the law. Okay, fine. But the second question is like, all right, you're the junior deal partner on that deal. How do you price the deal? So what is Bitcoin worth if we assume there's a quantum computer that can forge Bitcoins? This sounds like a WeWork level of so you have the company and anyway, it just doesn't. This makes me skeptical. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with physicists or the research. Or the research could be brilliant and there could be breakthroughs. And these are completely different things. But vibe-wise, I'm like, someone explain to me what's going on here, because that is just weird.
Well, also, it's like I don't know. Just my first impression is if you can build a scalable quantum computer, is recovery I don't know. Maybe you would have higher aspirations than recovering random lost Bitcoin.
But I think that's actually what this suggest is possible. It's one of two things. One, it could be they think VCs are dumb and this is the best way to get money. And I can respect that hustle. The other thing is that they actually they had higher aspirations that weren't credible. There is no market for quantum chemistry. They can't get the market won't put money in. And this actually is the best thing to have. Because the other thing that people don't really realize is yes, the National Security Agency, GCHQ in the UK, the Chinese Ministry of State Security would probably pay for a quantum computer, but they wouldn't pay the R&D costs we're talking about, right? Their solution when they need that kind of shit is they put malware on devices, right? There's a whole commodity hacking industry. And $1 trillion for one quantum computer that maybe you can break a couple of things an hour, that buys you a lot of malware. And so they'll pay for it, but they won't pay for the R&D for all that capability. So it may well be that the only thing you can use to finance quantum computing is breaking cryptocurrency. But if that's the case, my suspicion is that just means we won't get quantum computing.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless there's so many breakthroughs that it becomes you can print it out of a 3D printer for cheap or do it on existing lithography, which there are startups at MIT and people who are claiming to do that. So that could also revolutionize it, right? It's just if you give me 1,000 qubits for free because you did it off an existing, 8 nanometer process or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it also seems basically, to what you're saying, the vast majority of people or companies that I see who are quite bullish and are saying 4-year timelines, they have massive monetary incentives to say that. And this is just a tale as old as time. So I haven't, but maybe I'm looking in the wrong places, right? But it is. Well, I'm glad you give me a little bit of reassurance there. So I appreciate it.
To play devil's advocate, I will say that from the Scott Aronson point of view, right, the physics can change and then revolutionize the market, right?
Yeah.
I definitely would be bearish on the companies claiming this now. But if someone else comes up with some breakthrough, then it's real easy for some set of MIT or Caltech whiz kids, or actually I should rep Maryland here. We have one of the best quantum computing programs in the country, to just go build a new thing. They'll do it, and it will happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like the business model of the existing players who have been around for a couple of years is in fact not going so well.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you. I really appreciate you coming on. I got to cover a lot. So yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.